back in London, I enjoyed catching up with sensemaker Euan Davis, especially his collective content had supported him on a big program at one of his last companies. Euan's route into thought leadership, in-house at big tech companies, has been different to anyone else's in this season. He came up as an industry analyst, and he makes no secret of the training that provided, and some of the legends he's worked with along the way. He's also not short of an opinion or two on how AI is affecting research, and he's bullish about its use, helping him and Virtusa create meaningful thought leadership faster than before. I say that, but he's also long on the human side of things, including in-person events, where, he points out, content also has important roles. So get ready to buckle up for today's episode, and also learn how training as a chef turns out to be pretty useful too, whatever it is you're cooking up.
And now, as part of Collective Content's SenseMaker Sessions podcast, today's content leader is Euan Davis, Vice President Growth Markets at Virtusa, with thanks to our sponsor, Highbeam Global, a global full-service market research firm. Today's episode was filmed in November 2025 at Spiritland Studios, London.
And I am really pleased to be joined today by Euan Davis, who's VP Growth Markets at Virtusa. Welcome to the SenseMakers
Thank
podcast.
you very much.
Really good to have you here. We go back a little bit of time, and we'll talk about that history. I want to talk a little bit about taking the analyst route into the current space you're in, but also being a kind of accidental analyst earlier in your career. But as we sit here, we're in London, we're in Spiritland Studios. And we talked sort of hilariously about Bagley's club nights and things like that. So it goes all the way back to the 90s. So you know this space. You want to tell us anything about that?
Not really, no. But it wasn't a nice place to be after dark. This part of London.
It's changed a lot.
It has changed a lot, and much for the better. I mean, it's beautiful out there. Cold Drops Yard, and all the developments. There's even a swimming pool, I think.
News to me.
An outdoor pool, which people can use.
It's a bit chilly this morning, so maybe not right now. But yeah, I mean, it's an incredible space. I think the creative spirit of the neighborhood is still like lived on, and here we are today recording this. You said to me that so you've ended up at like a lot of the big analyst houses that people would know. So from IDC, Forrester, where I think is probably the biggest influence on you, a firm that ended up becoming part of Gartner, and Yankee Group, which is a name I hadn't heard for many years. And we could talk about 3G license auctions or something like that. I probably spoke to you back then when I was a journalist. So tell me about how you sort of fell into sort of analyst, industry analyst work.
Well, it's a long and windy track. So I actually qualified as a chef. Would you believe?
Okay, this is news, yeah.
So I qualified as a chef and emigrated to London, as most people from the north did back in the early 90s. And I soon realised that really wasn't for me. So I took a procession of temporary jobs, and getting temping work was really easy in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And I landed at some pretty awful administration jobs. And I got talking to a friend at work, and he said, well, you know, I started this job at a place called IDC, and I really, really, really like it. You might like it yourself. And I went for the interview, and I managed to impress them, and they gave me this newfangled thing called the internet to look at.
Yeah.
And I had to do this research program on ASPs, and every program had a binder.
Wow.
So
ASPs,
ASPs, you remember back in the mid 90s. And every research program had a binder that you had to fill. So these were, you know, things that were filed at companies, and they had all the kind of reports for the year.
Right.
And my binder was around internet services and ASPs. And that was in the mid 90s when it all really started to
start going crazy.
Explode.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the guy that got me the job was a guy called Phil First, who runs HFS. And I have to have to credit him with giving me a leg up into IDC. But I met some really good mentors over the years. So from IDC, I went to Yankee Group. I worked for a lady called Camille Mendler, who is
Yeah,
everyone
remember
knows,
Camille?
world
Yeah,
famous, and
yeah.
she really did help me understand how you hold yourself in front of a client, actually,
Okay.
and almost steal your nerve when you're thinking about a point of view that you want to get across. And from there, I went to Forrester, and there was a great chap there called Andrew Parker, who unfortunately passed away when I was there. But he was one of the best analysts, I think, in the world at the time. And obviously, from there, I went to HFS when I turned 40 and had that. What am I doing? I'm 40. I can't be an analyst. The rest I need to roll the dice. And I went to HFS and learned a lot around how to think about a market and maybe in a really provocative way.
Okay.
And I did that for a year or so, then went to Corporate Executive Board, which is part of, was bought by Gartner and one of the biggest acquisitions, I think, in research at the time.
Right.
And at that moment, I thought, okay, well, I fancy working for a vendor now. I've done the analyst gig for about...
You've done all the analyst gigs.
All the analyst gigs, yeah. So any question you have about an analyst company, come to me, because I know them all.
Yeah, and in this series, we've spoken to plenty of people who started out in business journalism and ended up at usually big companies, heading up content and research often.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of people who come up through a pure insights and market research route, often within those big companies. And your route is one of those routes into the kind of space you are now, but probably more on the less common side. So there's lots we could still refer to on the analyst side, but you then went into the corporate world, and we should say we've had some dealings with each other. Where you went to Cognizant, had something called the Center for the Future of Work, which was a huge deal. Lots of analysts, big brains, and you guys were a client of ours for that time. What was that like? What was the whole experience like?
It was really exciting. So it was set up by a guy called Malcolm Frank, and Malcolm Frank is one of the biggest minds in IT services. And I got to know him when I was at Forrester, and I could see what Cognizant was. Cognizant back then was a really, really big success story. It was growing, around about 20% every year on a quite a large revenue base. But they had a problem, and their problem was no one knew who they were, so they were like the world's best kept secret. And every time they went to a big client and proposed some huge transformational deal that went into millions of dollars or millions of pounds or euros, the client would turn around and say, Cognizant? Who the heck is Cognizant? Why should we be spending this much money with them?
Right.
So Malcolm had the idea that he wanted to set up this thought leadership engine as a way of basically building brand with a different kind of audience outside the CIO office. And it did it really well. So it was run by Ben Pring and Paul Roehrig. And Paul Roehrig was Forrester, where I came from, and Ben Pring was Gartner. And that was like the yin and yang of the institute or the Center for the Future of Work. And it really worked. It opened up doors. It opened up conversations. And it was really, really basically pushing the business to catch up, because we were talking about these big trends in, work, business, society, and the business really had to catch on to it and try and make market from it. So it was a really, really big deal at the time. Actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And an impressive operation. And I mean, one theme that's come up in this series is the level of competition amongst the sort of 20 or 30 biggest companies doing this kind of thought leadership is fierce. It's very, very hard to make headway. So I get that initial challenge that Cognizant had. And then amazing work. And I sense across the industry, certainly in terms of what we might call B2B tech and services, maybe professional services slightly different in the world. But this feels like there's been a bit of a retrenchment in the last 5 years, because this is a hard thing to do, right? It's a lot of money. It's a lot of effort. It's a lot of getting the right team together and leading. Is what I've said accurate?
Yes, I think so. I looked at what happened at Cognizant, and that's exactly what happened at Cognizant. We went into retrenchment, and they decided, the Center for the Future Work wasn't really needed. And I think they might have kicked themselves a little bit, because it was a great brand, and people understood what it was and what it could do. They wrote, articles, books. They were published in the Harvard Business Review. 21 Jobs of the Future was one of the most successful things we did. I got on Newsnight, so you got all this. All this kudos, really.
Yeah.
And it was decided that no, we needed to think rethink things, and I feel that that might, in retrospect, be a little bit of a mistake for how things are looking right now.
Yeah, and I'm not just thinking about that company, but after all that investment and
Hmm.
you get the flywheel turning,
Hmm.
it is such a shame to then lose that
Mm.
momentum.
Mm.
And one thing you picked up on was like the earned media you get,
Mm.
that glow, which is not always quite measurable, although earned media is perhaps more so than other areas of thought leadership. Um, and that's something which again certain people have told us about, that really does feel like value, and you're really elevating the whole organization, which in that case again is a massive company.
Mm.
I'm not sure I had a question there, but it was more an observation, which is that is a shame. I wanted to specifically ask about your current setup and where you are, and you're at Virtusa now. I want to start with your job title. I introduced you at the beginning, and the eagle-eyed. The keen listeners will have noticed that you are VP of Growth Markets.
Hmm.
So we meet a lot of people in this series who have job titles around thought leadership,
Hmm.
insights, research. Why growth markets?
Well, growth markets points towards a territory outside the US. So Virtusa is a platform and product specialist. They tend to hide their light under a bushel. Actually, that's one of their problems. They have a little bit like Cognizant. They're doing some really good work. They've got some great client relationships, really deep client relationships, but they don't seem to really want to, credentialize it, talk about it, get the story out in the market. I think it might be a bit of a cultural issue. So growth markets is everything outside the US, so Europe, Middle East, Australia. And I was brought in as a VP of client services. And my boss at the time, a guy called Santosh Thomas, said he wanted me to be the chief storyteller, which made me pause and Riley laugh because it
I was
felt
going to
like,
say in a good or bad way,
well,
because
yeah, in a good way. He said, I thought, well, you need a poet for the
because we've all
organization.
heard it so much, and it
Yes,
is. I agree with you. It's a great thing, but
yeah,
it's also
great
a bit of
thing.
a cliche as well.
Yeah,
By then,
exactly.
yeah,
Hey, I'm a
yeah,
storyteller.
yeah, yeah.
So the way I looked at it, I said, okay, well, if you want someone to tell better stories, what you need to do is think about how you connect with the way the market is developing, and build a vision really of how you see the market developing, but connect that vision into what you want to sell and what you want to be known for. So when it came down to it, I thought, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to set up almost like a kind of outward facing think tank, a little bit like the Center for the Future Work.
Hmm.
But I also needed to build functions within the business that talked about our value, our insights, and our knowledge, and begin to share that internally within the company. So what I've done is built really three things. Really, I have advisor and analyst relations under my remit.
Okay,
I also have a strategic intelligence center, which is about client intelligence and client insight and storytelling around some of the credentials that we build. But I also have another part, which is Virtusa Research, which is outward facing,
right.
which is designed to understand what's happening in the market and connect some of our tools, solutions, methodologies to that, but go a little bit further and talk about maybe the future work, ways of working, talk about AI enablement, talk about agentifying the enterprise, all these aspects of the way modern work is beginning to change.
Yeah. So that second part, I think this is really important, that you have insights and you do work which never sees the light of day.
No,
That's the guide. That's to
it
help you
it
be a better
that's
provider.
actually right, Tony. So what it
Yeah.
does, I almost sort of look at it like two headlights. One set of headlights looks out at the market a little bit 2, 3 years ahead, and the other set of headlights looks inside and tries to understand exactly how the analysts are thinking about the market, how I connect our service offerings to make sure they are aligned with the way the market momentum is beginning to shift. I also work on the intelligence side. So if there's a client pursuit or an RFP, an RFI, and we need to put our best foot forward, I
Right.
make sure that we're connecting across analyst advisors, intelligence into Virtusa research and beyond. So you get this golden thread that
Yeah.
connects
Yeah.
internally to what's happening externally as well.
Okay. How's it all going?
Good question. Well, it's been 2 years now,
Yeah.
and I'm delighted to say the company has returned to health.
Yep.
Um, that's not me. You know,
I was going to say as
there's a
well.
we've had a new CEO, we've had
Yep.
a new sales momentum, so it's not me. But I'd like to say there's things that I do that have a little bit of they're literally like levers on growth. For example, how we come across to analysts, how we come across to advisors, how we think about our clients, but also some of the main messages that we're beginning to put
Mm.
out into market, and how we connect them through the chain, so to speak.
So through the chain, sometimes other parts of a business don't get what people like you do.
Mm.
Is it well understood, and are people good collaborators across the company?
Yes, they are. What's interesting, when I was introduced as chief storyteller, you could see a lot of eye rolling, like, who's this guy? And then when I, as I sort of got to grips with Virtusa, which is very similar to Cognizant, actually, just a lot smaller,
Okay.
but very similar. But once I got to grips with it and started making a network and starting to get to know the right people, because it is about people and, making sure you have the right connections, then, people began to appreciate what I could do. So, for example, if we have a particularly important analyst briefing, I'll get pulled in to think about the messaging and think about the storytelling. If we're trying to solve for a specific market opportunity that's beginning to emerge and beginning to catch fire, for example, around agentic AI, I'll get pulled in to pull in the requisite research, but also to think about some of the messaging that goes around it. There's way more intelligent people than me at the company, but my job is to try and support them and make sure that they, shine in a way that I know that they can.
Very, very humble of you.
Thank you.
But I love the way that you are brought into that sharp commercial edge of it as well.
Mm.
So new business and providing what people need to get there.
By the way, I never got that at Cognizant. What was quite interesting, I was like the kind of rolled out if they needed to be a little bit more, seen to be a little bit more innovative. If there was a conference we wanted to show up at, or there was a client event that needed a little bit of, a little bit of magic, I used to get, dropped into that. But I have to say, I was a little bit divorced from some of the commercial
Hmm.
conversations that were happening. And what I really like about my current role is I'm really beginning to understand how everything connects together, from the service offerings through to the client communications, through to some of the client conversations, some of the requests, some of the innovation that's beginning to happen, some of the ways in which we're beginning to adjust our service portfolio accordingly.
Mm.
I mean, it's a very different job from what I did at Cognizant, but I don't think I could have done it unless I did the gig at
Yeah.
Cognizant, so to speak.
Okay. It's really interesting. You also mentioned the research center there.
Hmm.
Um, so first foray into AI. I'd love to know how you're using AI when it comes to different types of research. Yeah, people talk to us about things like basic things like survey creation, but also whether it can influence field work. And we've had people mention things like synthetic data, which sort of blows my mind a little bit. What what are you doing with AI and research?
So it's a really good question, because I think the whole thing is beginning to melt away, the whole kind of research
Okay.
industry. And that's not, to sort of say it's a disaster. I just think it's beginning to kind of form into kind of new organizations and new ways of working. But what I think where it's really beginning to help is you begin to see everyone lean into the tools and use them for writing. And
Hmm.
one of the worries I have is we're beginning to see literally way too much content. And to try and control that content is getting really, really difficult to keep the message
Yeah.
discipline.
Do you have to you fight that battle internally and say, do people come to you who maybe aren't experts in this particular area and say, why aren't we just like
I
producing
do,
this all with
yeah.
AI?
I mean, if you, I don't know, 5 years ago, everyone, the big goals in everyone's big goals in everyone's plans were, more thought leadership, and now we're doing more and more thought leadership. And you question, is this really thought leadership,
Right.
or
Better
so it
better thought leadership might
better?
become the plan now. Yeah.
Exactly. So it feels like it is changing really,
Mm.
really, really quickly, and we probably both use these tools. I, I use Claude and ChatGPT and things like that to understand how, I could draft a little bit more effectively and write a little bit more quickly. But I am amazed at just how useful these tools are. What used to take me kind of 2 to 3 weeks to get done
Mm.
can take me literally kind of 2 to 3 hours, and it's that change which I think is phenomenal. So if I was a marketeer, I'd be looking at thought leadership and marketing and content creation and thinking, wow, this is all ready for a huge change on how the whole thing works. To the question of synthetic data, I've been to a couple of conferences and sort of heard the spiel, if you will, and heard some. I've talked to some of my network that have used it. I need to know more, I think, before I trust it. I always really liked the CB model, which was I don't know if you're aware of the CB
No,
model.
tell us. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean that was the company I think I could have stayed longer at because I really really did enjoy it.
Okay.
And funnily enough, a good colleague of mine who was at Cognizant said the same. He worked at CB as well.
Is this CB Insights?
CEB, yeah, so Corporate Executive Board.
CB. Okay, so great.
Yeah,
Got it.
so they were bought by Gartner, but what they used to do was they'd have a team of researchers that would go into a specific function. So they had a membership-based model.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have 100 CFOs. These researchers would then go and interview all 100 CFOs. They'd then land on the top 10, burning issues that the CFO community needed to solve in the year to come.
Mm-hmm.
And they would then go and look at the best practices through that community to solve those issues, and then basically do a boot camp at the end of the year and run their CFOs through. Here's the 3 issues we think you need to solve for next year, and here's the 3 best cases we found from the network who are solving it. And they did that for CFOs, for chief procurement officers, for CIOs. They went function by function by function.
Yeah.
And that, for me, gives a little bit of future of what thought leadership might begin to look like with AI and everyone kind of churning out content and so on. I feel there's a need for a lot more community-based action, more humans, I suspect, to come together and solve what these issues are.
And I think that a lot of the smart organizations, so people in your shoes and then advisors in other kinds of companies who get to see into lots of organizations who might be competing day to day, there is the kind of collegiate thing you might get even among CFOs, to take that example, but being able to say that we can see across 50 of you and we can see what 80% of you are doing and you're in the 20% that are not doing it. Should we have a chat about that? Because sometimes that's news and that's extremely valuable. And sometimes it takes kind of like, can I sit down with you and just go over it? It's not a spun up report or dashboard or something. So I think there is definitely some future in that kind of I don't want to say touchy feely, but there's a more human side to it.
Well, there is, and I think in a way, I actually look at this with a little bit of optimism because I think there is a need to connect more than there was. And funny enough, I was talking to our marketing team the other day, and they were talking about from SEO to GEO and ChatGPT and how things were beginning to trend within within these tools and models and so on. And it shows that you need to have your house in order when it comes to your content, when it comes to your case studies, when it comes to your credentials, when it comes to showcasing your experts. But there's nothing like meeting your peers and discussing issues that you want to solve and think about solving. And I feel companies, I think that's going to be the future of how thought leadership will play out. There'll be a lot more connection. I think the conference industry has been through, I'm not saying there needs to be more conferences, but I mean, post-COVID, it definitely felt that people are a little bit burnt out. Why? And just didn't really want to get out of bed to go to a conference. Like, why should I? And just work at home. But now I think there's now a recognition we need to get together and discuss some of these issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing a lot more in-person activity. The trust element is big because when you're having a conversation, I say like this, maybe not with the microphones, it's undeniably, this is who you're speaking to. It's not a bot who's contacting you at a weird time on a Sunday. And you're thinking, why is this person messaging me now? And if you ever write back and say, hey, are you really there? And then nothing happens for 48 hours, you know it's not really a very authentic interaction. So the human thing is definitely a big thing we're seeing. You mentioned a few things to do with AI on, sort of, say, content creation and research. What worries you the most about AI usage?
A really good question. Generally, or just in thought leadership?
Yeah, it's related to thought leadership and research, and in your field, in your job. Where are your sort of pain points with it?
Originality. So I think there's a real dearth of originality actually in thought leadership, and my suspicion is you're looking at the best thought leaders and basically taking their ideas and recycling them within your own context, which begs the question that you need to have maybe a new approach on how you actually lead with thought leadership with your clients and with your prospects. So the originality question, I think, is really important to try and solve for.
Yeah. Any answers?
Well, no, it's funny enough. I think there's quite a lot of discussion going on. There's a good friend of mine, Bob Boudet, is just writing about the future of thought leadership. He's done some interviews with service
He's got
providers.
some great content around
Yeah,
this kind of thing.
he really does, and
Yeah.
he's sort of been promising this book, and I'm kind of curious to see it.
Okay.
Same with I think Anthony Marshall and Cindy Abraham.
Cindy Anderson.
Anderson, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
My
Anthony
apologies,
was
Cindy.
sitting in your very seat not that long ago.
Well, that's the thing.
so
So they've done a whole exercise around the ROI of thought leadership, which I
Yeah.
really need to get my head around.
Oh, it's impressive. It's impressive, and gets cited by every other person who sits in the seat. So they should be happy.
Yeah, they really should. And you need to. I always find you need to try and explain to an executive team why it matters, and I'm surprised that we do have to explain why it matters quite so often.
I was going to say every
and
year.
quite so regularly. Every time budgets are up. Well,
Yeah.
why do we need this? Well, why wouldn't you do it? That's how I come
Yeah.
to it, really.
Is there anything in particular you look out for in terms of metrics or proving the ROI?
I do. So of course you can have vanity metrics like eyeballs and how many people have downloaded the report or downloaded the infographic. But you know what? You can put money behind anything, and those metrics will go the right way. So if you're putting a paid media campaign behind a particular report, what you'll find is the report will do really well. I think there's maybe more softer metrics that you look at how the organization's responding to it. Things like sales enablement.
Yeah.
Things like roundtables that feature the research, things like partner events, like you go to Google Cloud Next and you present a vision really,
Yeah.
or Dreamforce, you present our vision of how we think the data organization of the future will evolve, or what does it mean to agentify process work for the cloud. So I feel if that thought leadership starts almost bleeding through the organization, then you're beginning to make an
Right.
impact
Right.
in terms of what you're doing. So
Yeah, I think some of those things can get overlooked, as in not measured, even though there's goodness there.
Mhm.
And then I think something you said a few times is the sort of culture of it, like the thread through the whole organization. That's something I'll take away from this. We're reaching towards the end here. Something I
Really?
ask everyone. I know. We're just getting going,
got
and we
started.
see we can talk more. But something we ask everyone is around like looking back, like everything you've done, and you've talked us through some of those steps. Imagine you're going back those 30 years or so to the start of your career. You're 22 years old. Could you have foreseen anything that was to come? And what advice would you give to your 22-year-old self? Not be a chef, or
Well, actually, to go back to the chef point,
being a chef is good though. Don't
I
let
tell
me.
you, if you can stand the stress of a professional kitchen, you can stand up
Right.
and present to 1,500,
Yeah.
CIOs or CEOs, because nothing beats the stress of having to, or nothing prepares you for life than a professional kitchen or kitchen brigade. So that's my sense on that one. But to my 22-year-old self, I would say don't sweat it quite so much. I think I spent so much time worrying about what I was going to do.
Yeah.
And I even started taking my accountancy exams because I thought, okay, well,
Right.
I'm going to have to,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to be something when I grow up. But I find those networks, those friends you make, those professional friends you make, those are the most important things. And making sure that you're listening to the opportunities and going for those opportunities as you come along. So I told you about the friend of mine who got me the gig at IDC. It was just being open to it and saying, yeah, I think I'd
Yeah.
give that a go and see what happens. It's got to be better than doing what I was doing. So that's how we got to it. But the other question, could I foresee? Absolutely no way.
Yeah.
Absolutely no way. When I first started, I was doing internet services and it felt like unicorns and rainbows. Everything was kind of, we're getting into this new sort of mid-90s world, and
Yeah.
it felt like the Cold War was over. Climate change wasn't really a thing. Things were beginning to bloom, but I could never foresee the way things have turned. What I think is beginning to happen is a little less globalization and a little bit more localization,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's actually a good thing. Actually,
Okay.
to see how how it would happen. I'd love to see Europe begin to, and I count the UK as part of Europe. I'd love to see Europe maybe assert itself a little bit more in the tech markets. One of the best pieces of research that I did. That's a really good question. What's the best piece of research you did that no one read?
Yeah.
The best piece of research I did was to look at the kind of startups and meetups around Europe, and you could actually graph them. There was sort of software that you could sort of see where they're happening. And you could sort of see there was a real AI kind of concentration in Manchester, which I was really interested in. There was a kind of sustainable city thing in Bristol. There was a customer care thing in Barcelona. You've been to see some really interesting cultural dynamics flow.
Yeah.
But I think I think in the next sort of 10, 15 years, I think it'd be really interesting to sort of see where Europe takes its tech scene, because there's some great stuff happening here. We just don't seem to able to motor it.
And the word sovereign is thrown around left, right, and centre today, and there's some of that going on. So we can talk about this a lot more, and I hope we will get the chance to. I wanted to say thank you to our audience today. Thank you to our sponsor as always, but mostly thank you to you, Euan Davis, for being our sense maker today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tony.
This was the Collective Content Podcast, SenseMaker Sessions. Let us know what you'd like us to make sense of next.